Welcome to the Dusty Trails and Tall Tales podcast, where we sit down with writers, storytellers, and creators keeping the spirit of the American West alive. Today we're joined by a truly exceptional guest, two-time Bram Stoker Award winner Michael Knost. Michael's written across multiple genres, edited best-selling anthologies, mentored countless authors, and now he's riding into Western territory with his newest novel, One Armed Bandit. He also leads Lawless Trails Press, a new home for traditional Western submissions. Michael, welcome to the show.
Thank you, Matt. It's good to be here. Appreciate you letting me come on and get to talk to you.
Well, sure, it's a privilege and a pleasure to get to speak with you. Why don't you tell us about your background and how you got started in writing?
I started out. I managed radio. I was in the broadcasting field for 35 years or more, and one of the many I managed a bunch of different radio stations, sometimes two or three at a time, and one of the stations that I managed in particular, excuse me, was a Christian radio station. Along with I had a country and a rock, and on the Christian station, um, it was a teaching preaching, so people would they would purchase time to be able to put their sermons on and so forth. I had a friend of mine who was he was a pastor. He wanted to do that, but he said, "I would if I do it, I would like for you to do your critiques on my program like you do on your regular staff," because he knew what I every week what I was doing. And so I said, "Sure." And so we started doing that, and I would give him feedback on what he could improve, what he could do better, what he was doing really well. And he eventually uh, went syndicated. His program went syndicated across the nation. And he said, your feedback really was great. You really ought to consider putting together a kind of a pamphlet with all the information that you gave me, so anybody new that comes on, you could share that with them, and they'll hopefully get better. And so I did that, and lo and behold, I had two other um, people who went syndicated as well. And one of those folks told me, "You really ought to consider putting this into a book." And I said, "I'm just an old radio guy. I'm not a writer." And he said, "Well, there's nothing like that on the market." And so we uh, we just laughed it off and went on. And the more and more I thought about it, he was right. I started doing some research. There was nothing like it on the market, and so I put together a book on that and sent it out. And the first publisher that I submitted it to, of course, I took 9 months of doing my research on the market, and within 2 weeks, the first publisher wanted to buy it. And so I got my start in nonfiction, and and then the bug hit, and I wanted to write fiction because I grew up reading science fiction, the old classic science fiction, fantasy, westerns, horror, and so forth. And so then I had to really learn how to write at that point, because when you're writing a nonfiction book, you're writing something that you just know really well. And I knew radio really well. I should have anyway, after being in it that long. And I really didn't know much about writing fiction, except for the fact that I've read a whole lot.
Yeah. Well, you got your start writing horror. So how do you transition from horror to westerns?
Yeah, when I first started, and by the way, what I wrote in the nonfiction, I was using my real name. Michael Knost is a pen name, and I chose Michael Knost because of my marketing background. What I wanted was I wanted a separation from the nonfiction, and I knew that I wanted to write speculative fiction, and so I decided horror was what I wanted to do. And so I was looking for a pen name, and Knost came about because Knost puts me on the bookshelves between Stephen King and Dean Koontz. So it was purely a marketing um, ploy, I should say, and it stuck with me. So now I'm where I'm writing in the Western genre. I feel like I had a few people who followed me, and I didn't want to give that up. So, but writing horror, if you think about it, horror is the only genre that we have that is named after an emotion. You got romance, but romance is not the name of the emotion. It's a genre that caters to love or lust or whatever that you whatever you write towards. But and horror to me was it was a learning curve because of the fact that when you start writing horror, you want to write the scariest, biggest monster, with the biggest teeth and the biggest claws and fangs and so forth. And that's not what um, good horror really is. It's not about the monster. It's not about how scary that monster is. It's about the emotions of empathy and sympathy that you can create for your reader to have on the main character who is facing um, those monsters and those entities and creatures and aliens and whatever. And so I really enjoyed that aspect in writing in that, so that it was more about writing about people, the people in the story, and that's what I really focused a whole lot on. And so the crossover with going from horror to western to me was real easy, simply because of the fact that the people who traveled west and was migrating toward the western coast, um, they were pretty much in the same boat as far as it was that great unknown. And so they uh, and again, it comes back down to it's about the people. It's not about anything else other than the people. You've got to have stories with it and so forth. But uh, whenever they were going west, they didn't know what to expect. And these were people who uprooted their families, and they began traveling. And I, I, I often think, would I be able to do that? And I served in the Marine Corps, and I felt like I was a tough guy that could handle just about anything. But to think about uprooting your family and moving them from one side of the nation to another that you didn't even know what was there. And then you also have that element of the unknown when it comes to the other. And in speculative fiction, it's either monsters or aliens or something like that. And that's what you saw with the Native Americans, because we didn't know, we called them savages, they called us savages, and um, uh, we were scared of them, and they were scared of us, and we fought them, they fought us, and it was very similar to me. So going into it again, the story has to be about the people, and you have to care about the people, whether they're good people or or not. And you have to be able to show both sides. I'm a firm believer in, the antagonist. You want to make sure that you you make them believable. They're not just evil, for the sake of being evil or whatever. They have wants just as much as the main character. And I always try to look from the other side. What if it was the enemy's story? Well, they wouldn't be the enemy, they would be the hero of the story because they have their wants and so forth. And so story is story, and I guess going from horror to the Western genre was pretty easy for me because of that. Now, I have to admit, the scaredest I have ever been in writing was writing Western, because in science fiction, the biggest majority of your readers in science fiction, especially back in the day, were scientists. And if you got an element of science wrong, oh, they're going to eat you alive, you know.
Yeah.
And so the Western genre is pretty much the same way, but it's not with scientists. You have historians, and you get an element of history wrong. You get the
So,
a wrong gun in the wrong era or something like that, and you're going to be in a whole lot of trouble. So
yeah.
that terrified me when I first started writing it. And very fortunate to have some friends that I'd made some friends in the Western genre while I was in the horror genre, because I'm a huge fan. For one thing, Johnny D. Boggs is probably in my top five list of writers, no matter what genre. And he and Michael Zimmer, another legendary great writer, got to know them. And then whenever I did the first book, which Trail of Madness, I asked them if they would read it and just tell me, look, do you see anything in here that I'm going to get hammered over? And so it was good to have those guys, because a lot of times you think and I it got to the point that I was, even words, I was thinking, well, was this word even around during that time or whatever? So yeah, but I love it. Uh, when I wrote One Armed Bandit, I was a little more at ease. But boy, I don't think that I have ever had any more fun writing than I do in the Western genre.
Yeah. You mentioned a pen name earlier. I talked to Robert Waterman a few weeks ago, and he said he picks his pen names based on how close they are to Louis L'Amour. So,
well, well, and that is in the same vein with Knost, with Stephen King and Dean Koontz. So it's
and it's
where
right.
you are on the bookshelf.
Yeah, Knost is right there by Louis L'Amour as well too. So,
Yeah, yeah.
yeah,
I, that was one of the reasons why that I left it and didn't want to change it. So
yeah. Well, since you brought up Johnny Boggs and Michael Zimmer, you recently published a book, or were published. Can you tell us a little bit about Four Guns and 16 Trails?
yeah, that was that was a joy to actually put together. I asked them if they would do some stories for it. I had four stories, and the four guns represent the four writers, Johnny and Vaughn McKee, who is a fantastic writer herself, and then Michael Zimmer and myself, and each of us um, put in 4 stories, and that's what the 16 trails are, is the 16 stories from us. And so you get a lot of different stories, a lot of different backgrounds. You get it was a lot of fun. Most of the stuff that they included were things that they'd already had published. So most of their stuff are reprints. Mine was all new because I just hadn't been publishing Western stuff, and I just started writing, so I was tickled to death to be able to get this done. And you talking about um, Lawless Trails Press.
Hmm.
My friend, um, who his name's Tony Acree, and very good friend. He lives in Louisville, and he and I, we've known each other for a very very long time. He published under another publishing house, which is Hydra Publications, and he he published Writers Workshop of Horror 2, which I'd won my second Bram Stoker Award for, and this was 3 or 4 years ago. Uh, and wonderful guy, one of those people that you trust with everything. And he and I were talking one time at Imaginarium, which is a convention in Louisville, and I was telling him what my plans were, that I was planning on switching over to the Western genre, and I told him about the project that I was doing with Trail of Madness, which was the first uh, novel, which was more of a novella. And he said, "Well, who's going to be publishing it?" And I said, "Well, I don't know. I haven't even looked or anything. It's just something that I'm writing right now." And he said, "If I put together an imprint under, because he has a number of imprints under Hydra," he said, "Would you consider letting me publish it?" And I said, "Well, sure, yeah, you know," and I thought he was just joking around. And then he came back to me about a week later and said, "It's done." He said, "We've got everything set up, and let's work out the details for your book." And so we did. And after a while, um, I did so much when it comes to the editing and so forth. That's just the background. And I had the idea of the new novel, and I wanted to do that. And I had an agent and was shopping uh, the novel, and then also talked to him about the anthology, and he wanted to do both. And so we got that all squared away. He took on the novel, he took on the anthology, and we were talking one evening, texting back and forth, and he said, "Why don't you become the publisher for Lawless Trails Press?" And I at first I balked at it because um, worried about how that would interfere with my writing and with what I did, and so forth. And he said, "No, seriously," he said, "you've got this passion for it, and your goal is to really try to get the Western genre rebounded, and because the Western genre is in a lull, And it really reminds me of what happened. I wrote a piece, and it's going to be in the Western Writers of America Roundup magazine. It's going to be in there in this newest issue. And the piece really talks about in the 1980s, the horror industry really bellied up and looked like, it was just going to tank completely. And so there were a number of things that happened that we saw, and we were able to. Many of us were able to, uh, swim out of it, and make it, and saw how we could improve, and we did. And I say we, but there was a whole lot more people than me that was doing it, and uh, I I want to see the same thing with the Western genre. I mean, you think about it, the Western genre is our first genre. There was no other genre before the Western genre. Now, there were novels out that were science fiction, there were novels out that were fantasy, romance, or whatever, but there was no genre until the Western genre came around. And one of the biggest things that happened was Owen Wister's The Virginian.
Mhm.
And so my heart was, this genre that has done so much for me as a reader and a somebody that loved reading and loved story. I just didn't want to see it die. And you also take a look and you can say there's so many westerns that are out right now that we don't even consider them westerns, but they technically are westerns. Star Wars is
Mhm.
is a very good example of western. You
Yeah.
even have the cantina scene. Mandalorian. Oh my
Yeah.
gosh, is
Mandalorian, that's textbook Western.
yeah. You got Firefly. That was a TV show that was a while back, but you also now have Yellowstone. You have Longmire, which really did quite a bit, and Landman now is a big one, and CJ Box with his stuff. There's and they're made into movies and television series and things like that. But I love that too. I really do. I love those types of westerns. But that doesn't mean that we have to allow the traditional western that we grew up on to go away. uh, I want my daughter, and my daughter knows, and she's seen many movies and TV shows. She's been pretty much forced to, I guess you could say. But the younger generation, um, they'll watch, um, you know, Tombstone or something like that, and they
Yeah.
don't even realize that it's a western because it's just something that captures their attention. And it's got great action, but great characters in it, and great acting. And I would like to see more and more of that. And I think one of the things that we can do is uh, one of the things that we had a problem with in the horror industry back in the 80s was we had more producers than we had consumers. And that meant we had so many writers that were writing, uh, and not all of them were great writers. Not all of them were good. And but those who were producing were not consuming. So they were not purchasing books of other writers. They were not going to the movies to see, the horror movies or the TV shows. And when you don't become a consumer and you're not supporting the genre that way, it creates a problem simply because of the fact, you know, the bigger publishers right now really have a hard time with, publishing a Western because they say nobody's reading them right now. And so that's one of the things that I think if we can get back on track to where those of us who are producing in the genre becoming more consumer in the genre as well, that would really help. Even if it's something that you don't care for, if but going to the movies and because that dollar is going to speak volumes. That's a vote to the uh, big four publishers. It's a vote for Hollywood because they will make more, they will produce more, and that will open up more doors for the producers, and it will create more opportunities for more writers. So that's my soapbox.
Yeah. Well, tell us about One Armed Bandit. What makes it different from anything else that's out on the market currently?
Well, the thing that I loved about One Armed Bandit, I love a character that is he's the main character and you care about him, but he's not one of the characters that's wearing the white hat. You get the white hat and the black hat, and he's not cut and dry. He's a guy that um, lost his arm, while he was with his gang in a bank robbery, and this happens before the story even starts. And so he, but he, his best friend is the guy who, when he lost his arm, when he got shot, took him to a doctor, got him, mended up, even though he had to have his arm amputated. Um, then he and that friend were split up a little bit, and he found out that his friend was in jail. He was waiting to be hanged because of horse thievery, and come to find out, the horse thievery was with the army, and so he was pretty much doomed. And the one armed bandit, he was in a jail himself, and an army sergeant comes and gets him out to take him to Fort Hayes to be court-martialed because he had went MIA. He abandoned his duties, but he hadn't, and he knew that he hadn't, and he couldn't figure out what was going on. And so we find out exactly what's going on later in the story. But he ends up robbing a stagecoach himself, and he finds something uh, in the loot that he gets that he thinks he can use as a bargaining chip, so to speak, to free his friend from the gallows. And So that's what this story is about. And there's a lot of action. There's a lot of twists and turns that goes throughout. But again, it's about the people. And even though they may not be the cleanest uh, people, that you'd want to deal with, they're still human beings. And I've always said it's unsettling, but very uh, touching whenever you can feel like that you have something in common with these really terrible people. And again, that may be something that goes back to talking about the instances with horror in the western. But um, I really enjoyed One Armed Bandit. I knew what it was going to be. It was one of those that whenever when I started writing it, I knew what the ending was going to be. I knew where it was going, and it was the first time that I had not outlined a story in many, many, many years, and I just found myself writing towards the ending, and I had a ball with it. I mean, absolute, just had a ball. And usually, writing a novel takes me a very, very long time, and I actually wrote this in 9 weeks. And how that happened was I decided I wanted to try something different, and I started writing 1,500 words a day every day. Even on the weekends. And if there was perchance that I didn't get in my 1,500 words in a day, then the next day whatever I didn't get in, I had to add to, and that only happened twice. And of course, just to have happening once was just terrible because that I had to go into overtime and work harder. But every day it was writing out whatever it was that for that 1,500 words. And before I went to bed, I just wrote down a note of what tomorrow's scene or scenes were going to be. And
Yeah.
so it was it was a lot of fun. Yeah, I remember a while back I had someone who told me they I was on a show, and they were asking me if I what I thought about either being an outliner or a pantser, which is
Yeah.
the term for writing by the seat of your pants. So you don't
Mhm.
have an outline or anything. And I just said, we're all outliners. I don't care
Yeah.
who you are. You're my first draft of One Armed Bandit was my outline, and so anybody who is a pantser, your first draft is really your outline, and then you flesh it out uh, better and better. It's just those who do outlines already have that out of the way, and their first draft is probably in comparison draft number 5 or something like
Yeah.
that. So, but I had a lot of fun with it. I really, really had a whole lot of fun with it, and uh, one of the things that really it was the first time also that I wrote in first person.
Oh wow.
I'd never written anything in first person, and so it came to me fairly easy simply because of the fact that the main character is from Kentucky. I'm from West Virginia, so we're right next door. I mean, I can be in Kentucky in 20 minutes, you know. So this main character came from where I'm from. And so that first person, I was a little more free to be able to allow him to speak, and a lot of the mannerisms and so forth were things that I saw my grandfather and grandparents do and people that I grew up with. So it rang a little true to me, I guess you could say. And then going west with it, I like having all the characters to sound different, so they're not all they don't all sound the same. So it made it really easy because, of course, and you read the story, so you
Yeah.
know where I'm
Yeah.
going with this. So we have some Irish uh, characters in there. We have others who are from other areas, and they pick up on the main character's dialect and
Mhm.
so forth. And so it was a lot of fun for me. I really really enjoyed it. Toying with uh, doing a another one with the One Armed Bandit.
With the same character.
Yep,
That's cool.
got an idea for it and sort of a
Yeah.
summary, but I don't. But I have others there's one that is in particular in my brain that I know is next.
Yeah. One of the things I usually like to ask about is other writers' writing process, and you pretty much answered that before I asked it. So I tend to be more of a pinster myself, but like you said, it's more of an outline. I hadn't thought of it that way because you always go back and flesh it out more.
Yeah. Uh, you know, with that, you don't. I think it's just a matter of getting your heart on the page, and look, I tell people this all the time. You know, I do writing retreats, writers workshops where people come and we critique the story, their novels, and so forth. And if you ever sit in on a class, if you're in a workshop or something, and somebody says, "Okay, you have to do it this way," get up and leave, walk out because they have no idea what they're talking about. I mean, that might be true for them, but if you put 100 writers in a room and you ask each and every single one of them, and all of them are very successful, you ask them how they do it, you're going to have 100 different answers. And I
Yeah,
always say, um, there's a million ways to the stage, and your only goal is to get to the stage. And
yeah,
once you're on the stage, then you have to deliver the goods. And
yeah,
so I'm a firm believer in that. I think that as a writer, I always say there's really two rules, and I made them up, so they really don't count. But I think the biggest one I think is, um, you well, actually, with the two, the first one is, you only break a rule that you know. And so what that means is you have to study as hard as you can, and you learn what all the unwritten rules are. And they're not really rules. If you think about it, it's just these are things that we've learned from other writers, their mistakes, and so forth. And so I think the if we look at rules as, this is the reason for the rule, and if you can take that information of what that reason is, it may not apply to you. And but the other one is I always say, break every rule that you can, uh, but make sure that you have a reason for breaking the rule. And when I started writing, at the very beginning, it was really hard because I'm the type of person that, when I learn things, and I love to learn, I'm to this day, I want to learn and learn more about the craft and about everything that I can when it comes to writing, or whatever it is that I'm doing. I love it. I'm addicted to that. And so when I started learning all of these rules, it really crippled me at one point. I did some writing workshops at the University of Kansas, with James Gunn, who was the mentor there. And I came back, and it was probably 6 months to a year that I couldn't write, because I was crippled by all of these rules. And now that I know, these things, I would start to write, and as I would write, oh, I can't do that because this rule. Try something else. Nope, can't do that because of this. And it wasn't until I got to the point that I don't care. I'm going to write what I want to write. I know what the rules are, why the rules are there, and I want to be able to stay within that. And so, and it was the first time that I really used my own voice. and I was no longer trying to sound like, Stephen King or Joe Lansdale, or any of these great writers. And Joe Lansdale, good friend, he and I, we were talking one day, and he wrote a piece for one of my anthologies, and about that very thing about voice. And he was talking about until he wrote something, and he was, I'm going to write it like me, and not someone else. And then he started seeing um, publication, and I was the same way. So just not caring anymore. It wasn't that I didn't care. It was, I have to put this junk behind me in my head, of the things that are wrong or whatever, and just deliver what I think is going to be the best story that I can. And then I can fix or whatever that I have to do later. But I think too many up and coming writers get in their own head, and it, especially with the rules and so forth, and it really hampers them from uh, delivering what they should be doing, and what they really, because they have a great voice, they're just not using it. They're an Elvis impersonator, you know, and you know being an Elvis impersonator, that's great, but you're never going to have your own material. You're never going to have your own voice. You're never going to, you know, do something that people will remember you, because if you're an Elvis impersonator, they're always going to remember Elvis. And
Yeah. Well, you do a lot of manuscript critiques and writers workshops as well. What's some of your advice you give to up and coming writers seeking publication?
well, that's some of the advice that I usually give, and I think the biggest thing is to read as much as you can, good and bad, because we learn. I remember, I hated school when I grew up. I hated everything about it. Um, but there was something about reading whenever and I'll tell you the story of how I became a reader in just a second. But um, I read so much that later on in English class, I would learn what something was, and I knew what it was because, having read so much, I knew it was supposed to be done that way. I just didn't know that it had a name for it or something like that. And so we kind of learn as writers, we kind of learn vicariously, uh, uh, through the books that we've read. Um, and but I was in the fifth grade, and my I hated school, hated education, everything about it. And my fifth grade teacher, Bill Marino, he was from New York, and he was teaching in West Virginia. You can't get too much further apart than New York and West Virginia, whereas we call it West by God, Virginia. And he he knew that I just didn't like school, didn't like anything in education. My favorite subject in school, I think, was probably the lunch, and I know that's probably hard to tell by looking at me, but uh, and one day he catches me in the hallway, and he hands me a book, and it's a classic science fiction book. And this is the reason why I started in speculative fiction. He handed me this book, and he said, I want you to read this. And I thought, oh man, I'm going to have to do a book report. I'm going to have to do all this work and homework on this. And he said, no, no. He said, I just want you to read the book. And then when you're finished, the only thing I ask is, we get together and we have a conversation. I just want you to tell me what you thought about the book. There's no right or wrong. That's all there is to it. And while you're reading that book, you're going to be exempt from all homework that all the other kids have to do. So I thought, well, I can milk this for months, you know, because I had never read anything other than what you're made to read. And so I said sure, and I took the book home and I opened it up that night and I started reading, and I was blown away by this because I got sucked in into this story so quickly. And I talk about it today. It's I liken it to what I call theater of the mind, and simply because of the fact that with theater of the mind, the words that you're reading create something co-written with your own brain, and those words are transformed somewhere here into sights and smells and tastes and all of these different things. And I couldn't put the book down. I absolutely could not put it down. And I read that entire book that night. And this was not a children's book. This was a book for adults, science fiction readers. So it was not playing down to a younger mind or whatever. And I could not wait to get to school and to talk to him about this book. And so we sit down and I start talking and I'm gushing, talking about this book. And he gets this big grin on his face because he knows he's accomplished what he had hoped to do. And so he gets up, he goes outside to his car, and he brings in this big box. And the box is filled with these classic science fiction, westerns, fantasy, horror novels. And he said, "You're doing this for the rest of the year." And he said, "As long as you come and have these conversations with me, tell me what you think about the books. No homework for you that everybody else has to do."
Man, I wish I had a teacher like that.
It changed my life. We wouldn't be sitting here having this conversation right now uh,
Yeah.
had he not done that. So I owe a lot to Bill Marino, not just for the writing aspect, but because you can't read anything and not be educated. You cannot read anything. I don't care what it is, and not get a taste for more. And especially science fiction, because I was reading Isaac Asimov, who was a biochemist, as a kid, and I had to get a dictionary to look up, so many of these words to figure out what the heck he was talking about. But changed my life. It absolutely did, and I think that is to go back to your original question that I kind of took way over there. Um, I think reading and reading and reading as much as you can, because you're going to get so much from it. And, especially even reading bad stuff, because as you're reading, what they're doing wrong. And um,
It didn't work.
yeah. And another thing that I always tell writers too is to take your favorite novel of all time and reverse engineer it. And what I mean by that is you take your favorite novel that you've ever read in your life, and you write an outline as if you were writing the book. So every time everything that you read through the book and you see whatever the writer was doing, you write that down as if it's your outline. And once you reverse engineer that and you take a look at that outline, and you get to see what they did, then you get to kind of be like the Wizard of Oz. You're the man behind the curtain, and you get to see the man behind the curtain. And um, and, and if you do two or three of those, you start seeing things that are in common. And are you doing that in your writing? Are you using that? And even talking about, um, when I wrote Return of the Mothman, which was made into a movie, um, when I wrote that, I had so many things that I wanted to do, and the main character, I really wanted to have an internal struggle that mirrored the external struggle that was going on in the story. And so he was he was someone who lost his family when he was 5 years old. He was living with his grandmother, and so um, he ends up moving to North Carolina when he's 20 years old, and he's pushed so many people away because his best friend dies as well, and he feels like that he's not so much cursed or whatever, but he just can't stand loss anymore, and so he just pushes everybody away, including uh, a fiance that he's going to marry. And he doesn't even say anything to her; he just leaves, and he gets a phone call from a family member that he needs to come home. His grandmother is in pretty bad shape. He comes home, and they're putting her on hospice care. And anyone who knows what hospice care is, that's you're in your end stages of your life. And I worked as a marketing director for hospice at one point, and it's a wonderful, wonderful field, hard field for the people that work in it. But so this the grandmother, they put her in her room in a hospital bed, but she was getting hospice care, and she's talking to the main character, and she's looking out the window, and she says, "I'd give anything just to get to see my rose garden just one more time." And what she was talking about was looking out the window, she saw a stone wall that went all the way around the house that her father had built to keep deer and so forth out of their garden that was within. And uh, and her mother had planted roses before the rock wall was built, so the rose garden was on the other side. And so the main character decides, I'm going to tear down the the section that would be in the view of her window, so from her bed she'll be able to see her roses before she dies. So throughout the story, he's tearing down this wall all the way through this novel. And at the same time, what he's really doing externally is he's allowing people back into his life. He's letting that wall down himself. And I think when writers are able to do that more and more, and think about it, that's a book about the Mothman. It's a scary book, but it's, again, it goes back to, it's about the people, and love. It's about what we do for the people we love and so forth, and having that empathy and sympathy. So that would be another thing that I really try to get into the minds of up and coming writers is, internally what's going on that you can show us externally without coming out and telling us that's what you're doing. So I never give any hints that that's what's going on in that novel. I hope the reader gets to that, and if they don't, then it's an Easter egg that I get to keep. I love those little Easter eggs too because yeah, at the very beginning of the story, at the very beginning, the main character gets a phone call, that his grandmother, and he's at work, and he's working at a furniture factory, and he's got a stapler, one of those big, industrial staplers, and he sets it up on his shelf before he goes to answer the phone. And I had him putting that up on the shelf beside a box of, and I couldn't figure out what it was going to be. And that detail could have been anything. It could have been a box of anything, but it meant something to me. It had to be something. And so I made it a box of spacers.
Hmm.
And spacers are things that keeps things apart. Uh, and it ties back to that internal thing and also the external, what's going on in the story. So every word counts, and if it doesn't do something to move the story forward in some way, or if it doesn't build the character in some way, then you got to get rid of it. I think it was Stephen King or somebody who said, "Kill your darlings," and that's to kill the words that are not doing anything, and that's
Sure.
hard. It's really hard to do. But now I'm at the point that I'm just looking for, which ones should I get rid of? And I found also, if I fall in love with words, if I fall in love with a line that I've written that I think is just terrific, chances are it's going to have to go. Because if I've fallen in love with it, I had uh, James Gunn. The first time that anyone ever read one of my short stories, and all of the people who were there, they were, it was a Milford style, so everybody would uh, tell you what they thought about your story, and they'd read it like a week or so before, and so many people would read directly a line or a paragraph of mine, and then they would just say, "God, that was beautiful. That was just wonderful," And I thought, "Wow, I'm probably going to be a New York Times bestseller by noon, or something like." And then James Gunn, who he was up in his 70s at that time, and just a legend. Um, he was the last one, and he said, every place where those writers or those readers told you, you know, read out something that you had written and said, "Boy, that was beautiful," or whatever. And I said, "Yeah." He said, "Every single time you, as the writer, pulled the reader out of the story by saying, 'Look at me.'" So those lines that were just gorgeous lines or whatever, the reader was not thinking of the story. The reader was thinking, "I love that line. I love
Hmm.
that, beautiful," or whatever. And it was pulling them out of the story. And I thought, wow, I never thought of that before. And I still try to write good. Don't get me wrong, but I don't. I want to write clean. Is, I guess, the word that I'm trying to come to. Uh, not not trying to be fancy. Not trying. And this is something that I tell writers too. Don't try to write like a writer, because if you're trying to write like a writer, then you're going to end up writing that purple prose, and you're going to be writing that, that those lines that, when people read, they're going to look at those lines, and they're going to think, of you. They're thinking of the writer. A beautiful line. And if I was C.S. Lewis, I've pulled them out of Narnia, and I don't. And I want them in Narnia. I want them experiencing the story. Sorry, you get me talking about writing, and I'll go on and on and on.
Well, no, it's great to listen. What? Let's talk about Lawless Trails Press. What are you looking for in submissions, and where do you envision it heading in the future?
I'm really excited. Um, we're open for submissions right now, and we're looking for novels, traditional Western. We probably sometime in the future will end up taking on what I would call weird Western, but I like a term that Vaughn McKee mentioned to me. She's dynamic and but it's alternative Western. So it could be, a Western that has vampires in it or werewolves or something like that. We may end up doing opening up to that, but we're not open to it right now. Uh, I really want I really want good stories. I'm finding a lot of publishers, especially in the Western genre right now, they want writers to already have, 3 or 4 books ready to go. And if you don't, come back to us whenever you do. And they want to, have a novel out, every 6 months or something like that. And that's not us. I want the best novels that I can get my hands on. And I don't care if you've never ever written a novel before. If it is wonderful and I love it, I'm going to buy it. I'm going to put it on Lawless Trails Press. Uh, so traditional Western is really what we're looking for. We're not looking for nonfiction. Uh, Again, at this time, uh, that may end up changing. Um, but the big thing too that I want to stress is if you have something that was AI generated, I am not interested in it whatsoever. I do not want anything that has any AI to it at all. I want real stories written by real people and stuff that when people read, they're going to remember. And they can be shoot 'em up, but those shoot 'em up better have characters that I'm going to care about and remember. And again, they could be bad people. Uh, that's even better because I want real people. Don't give me stereotypes or anything like that. But looking at novels, probably the medium somewhere between 80 and 100,000 words would be really reaching for me. 95,000, 90 to 95,000 words would be probably the sweet spot that I'm looking for. Um, so yeah, I mean, I I guess I, again too, I don't care if you've never been published or if you've been published a hundred times. Uh, I'm going to give you an opportunity, and but you're probably also going to get feedback. So if I do accept it, I'm not giving feedback if I don't accept the story. Don't don't
So
get me.
if someone submits something and it's not perfect and you see ways it can be improved, you'll help the writer to improve it.
If I'm accepting it to Lawless Trails Press. But if I'm
Mhm.
rejecting the story, I'm not going to, simply because of the fact over the years in editing for anthologies and magazines, um, at the very beginning, I tried to give some feedback to writers, and so many people just can't accept, you know, feedback, and so I don't do it anymore. But if I'm going to work with someone, I don't care who you are. You could be a New York Times bestseller. You could be. I've worked with, and you can look at some of the anthologies that I've done. I've worked with a lot of big names: Stephen King, R.L. Stein, uh, Anne Rice, um, Neil Gaiman. Just so many people. If you send me something and I'm going to buy it, more than likely I'm going to have some thoughts on how to make it better, and we're going to work together with it. But that's what you want in an editor. You want somebody
Yeah.
that's going to take what you have and uh, help you make it the best that it possibly can be, because I want it to be successful. I don't want to publish something that I don't think is going to be successful. So, but yeah, there'll be feedback if I take it on.
Would you ever do any more Western anthologies in the future?
Yeah, that's probably going to happen, but not right now. Uh, there are a couple of projects that are in the works that I'm really not able to talk about at the moment. But anthologies are really tough because the business model is it's a dangerous thing, especially for a startup like Lawless Trails. Uh, if and I want to pay writers. I don't want writers, submitting something and not getting paid. So if I'm paying them at least 5 cents per word or 10 cents per word, um, and I've got 95,000 word, book, I've paid a ton of money, up front for that.
Hmm.
And so you tend to be a long time in the red before you get out of your investment that you've made. And I think investing in the writers is great. But at this moment, I just don't think that it's something that we could. It wouldn't be a very smart thing for us to do right away.
Yeah. Well, Michael, thank you so much for joining us today. It's been an honor talking with you, and I wish you all the best with Lawless Trails and hope it's a runaway success for you.
Well, I do too. I hope I don't run away too far or too fast. I'm old and fat now, and I don't run anymore.
Yeah. Well, I really enjoyed our conversation. I look forward to having you back in the future if you're so inclined. There's a
Yeah,
lot that I wanted to talk about. We just ran out of time tonight.
yeah. Well, anytime you just let me know.
You betcha. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you next time.